everybody. Welcome to Northeast Alabama Community College softball show with Coach Joe Guthrie. Coach, thanks for joining us. I know it's been a busy day for you and busy last several days, just to be honest about it, with the first pitch taking place this past Friday. And let me get introductions in. I'm all over the place tonight, guys. Sorry about that. I'm the Howard Chaney along with Phil Harris and like always, Coach Joe Guthrie of Northeast Alabama Community College Lady Mustangs. Coach, thanks for joining us. And back to where I started at, all over the place, but busy last few days. First pitch was this past Friday. How you think everything went?
So, yeah, it was just, like I was telling you guys off air, I think it's a solid opener. We were real pleased with, a lot of external things too, like, big crowd, it's a good crowd. We do most of our games in the fall on the road. We philosophically believe in playing a lot of four-year schools. A lot of having been on the other side of that as a former D1 head coach, we're that opportunity for those guys is to get a team on campus so they can showcase their campus. They're limited a lot of times on budget or NCAA rules or conference rules, on how often they can travel. So, we will come to them because obviously one of the things we want to do with our program is to get our kids seen and get them signed. And then the other part of that is just being able to play really good competition, in an exhibition season. It doesn't do anything but get you better. So, all those things were good, but, we have a couple of home venues, one of them obviously was Friday. We'll have another one on November 6th. So it was good. I felt like, our pitching was pretty solid with both, a mix of, had a couple veterans throwing and Skylar Branch and Kaylee Warnock, and they did a good job. I think they've improved. I think a lot of the newcomers that threw have improved just in the 5 weeks they've been here. So that was good. Hitting's always going to be a little bit behind, the pitching this time of year. And, we played a good Marion team that I think is going to probably contend. Our state is broken up into Division I and Division II. There's not a huge difference in junior college between those markers like there is more on the four-year level. I started that program many years ago. So it's, playing them is kind of near and dear to my heart, having been down there for 6 years. But it's good to see them doing well. Jeff Benson is a really good coach. They've been winning. I think this is his 8th or 9th year. And they've pretty much been winning ever since he got there and are a perennial playoff team. So, he does a good job. It's a tough place to recruit, and they certainly weren't a charity to us. And, we're going to prove some things with our situational hitting. I felt like, from a defense and a pitching standpoint, pretty solid effort the first time out for sure.
Well, like you said, there's a big crowd there. If I'm mistaken, one of the ones that was in the crowd is our own Mr. Phil Harris. I think he was able to be there. So, Phil, I'll let you take the questions away because you was there in person, and I know the questions are a lot easier coming from someone that was there than me just kind of guessing at it, to be honest about it. So, Phil, go ahead.
Well, Coach, and naturally I was there, and I'm kind of in a sense, I guess I'm kind of like you are as a coach. Is a real defensive minded. I'm the person when I watch games, hitting is hit or miss. I mean, you're going to hit sometimes, you're not going to hit sometimes, but defense is something I take a lot of pride in. When I played baseball, I worked a whole lot more on defense than I did batting. So I kind of watched that part of the game. And what I saw is the girls knew where they were going to go with the ball even before they made the catch. I mean, you could just tell that. I mean, they made great decisions, fundamentally a very sound softball team on defense. And that's what I was really impressed by.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, we did some things that were real good, for the first time out. There's a play in the second game that comes to mind that I highlighted, in our meeting today with our team, going through the film. The film will usually start on Saturday morning for me. We had a ball that, on the negative side, we caught some balls that were what we call tweener pop-ups, between the infield and the outfield. We did a better job of that than we have in years past. That's a credit to, Emory Burke and Morgan Perkins, on this particular play I'm thinking about, I think we had runners at runner at 2 only. There was a ball that dropped between, Bree Wilson, who's a freshman right fielder, and Emory Burke playing second base. And, I think they're capable of catching that ball. One of them, that's the negative. But the positive was, Bree caught that ball. We have a rule that, there's basically 3 times we throw the ball from the outfield to third base. If our eyes tell us that we 100% of the time have a play at third, if it's the only play, or if you're just getting it in, i.e. usually a single to left or center, then the ball will directly go to third. In that particular case, the kid kind of stumbled that was the runner at second base. Bree saw with her eyes that she had a play at third. She made a good throw. Marty McCluskey was playing third. She made a good catch and tag, got her eyes around to second base, then got her eyes around to first base. We almost get a double play back to Jada Hampton at first. That's stuff that usually takes about a semester to get, our team to consistently see. Because in our game, one of the things that's a lot different than in baseball, having, done both at a pretty high level, is the potential for secondary outs on balls from the outfield somewhere in the infield because of the timing and distance of our game. So, I felt like that was, those are little signs that, things are good. You've got to be able to catch and throw when you run a system like that. I thought we did a pretty good job of that, particularly in that play. And throughout the game, other than a couple of flubs, really in one inning in the second game. But, overall, pretty pleased with that aspect, for game 1 and 2 for sure.
Well, Coach, do you think, this year, assessing the way things were last year, this year, the young ladies kind of understand what's expected of them, so it's a whole lot easier because they're not doing any thinking, they're just reacting. They're going through what they're taught in practice, and they just react. Last year, it might have been a little bit of indecision.
Yeah, we're definitely bolstered by, we've got it's about a half and half group, and any given starting lineup we run out there is a half and half group most of the time. It really helps. In the infield, we're a little younger. We've got really talented players, but they're young. They're going to make some mistakes. Some of them didn't even show up the other day. I was talking to a couple of our third basemen about, just the way they were coming downhill or lack thereof on bunts. We got away with it because we had a veteran pitcher that, got to the ball before them, which shouldn't happen, but it did. We were able to be successful in that play. Emma Heinman and Jada Hampton at first base help us a lot because they understand the system very well. Emory Burke is a veteran player. She did play for me in the summer. She's, had a couple years under her belt at UAB. So she's a veteran player, but she hasn't played in our system. I think the more she plays in it, you're going to see a little bit more leadership go there. And then, at times, an Austin McNeese, a Morgan Perkins, a Marty McCluskey, and Olivia Acuff, they're going to show. They all those kids showed, some freshman moments, and then they also showed some, and really more often than not, some of that talent coming through. OA over at third base made a really good play to close the game. It was a flub initially off the glove. She turns around. And we get a reverse turn throw to first on a ground ball to third and get the runner. That was good. She didn't lose her mind, even though the initial contact with the ball wasn't great, but she stayed in the fight and made a play. And like I was telling the team today, it's a big difference between having out number 2 and no one on with a 1-run or tie game at the time in the top of the 7th than if you have that go ahead run on. With less than 2 outs, there's a lot of things the offense can do. So, we made plays when we needed to. Morgan Perkins had a couple plays up in the middle of the field. Their team did a nice job of, going low and hard in the middle with multiple runners. Morgan Perkins played one to her left. She played another one in the air that shut an inning down. Those are things we've got to do if we're going to win big games. And, it's just a fall game, but those are things that we definitely want to highlight that, are going to help us become a championship type of team, as we continue to go. So, it's good to see that early on. We need to do the things to sustain that. You know, we had a little bit of this in practice today. We're playing that team again tomorrow. I thought we were a little at times complacent. And you know, that we still need to learn how to not only win, but sustain success too, because I guarantee you they're going to be a lot harder tomorrow when we go down on the road at their place. So, you know, those are things that, you know, we've got to constantly keep an eye out for as players and coaches so that we continue to do these little things well, for sure.
Yeah, and I think you make a good assessment there in that, you know, Marion comes all the way up here, and, you know, and Addie Edwards was dominating in the first 4 innings. I mean, they could not catch, you know, she was blowing stuff by them. But as the game wore on, they kind of settled in and started getting some pretty good swings at her, started fouling some pitches off and started putting some balls in play. But Addie, she pitched very well. I thought the first 4 innings, she was very dominating.
Yeah, and you know, we're you know, it's one of those things too where we were debating a lot past the third. You know, do we, you know, you obviously don't want to run a kid down, you know, in terms of just durability in the fall. It's always one of those things that you're, especially as strong as our bullpen is. So, you know, but you also, there's going to be games, and Addie, you know, just knowing her, you know, throughout her career, she's a kid that typically gets stronger as she goes. She has a second win. I've seen her have a second and a third and a fourth sometimes in games. So she has that mindset to do that. You know, at this level, I thought they did a good job even early on when they had some swing and miss outs. You know, you mentioned it in the fourth. They did some of that even early on in the first and second and third innings where they're fouling off pitches. If we can be a little more precise with the changeup, in her case, it'll accentuate some of her finished pitches, and she has more than one. And that's just, you know, those are things that, you know, she's going to learn, you know, as she gets into this type of competition, things that you can get away with in high school and travel. That, you know, that team had a clue of what to do with 2 strikes. They extended at bats. They did a nice job of keeping themselves in the fight, even when, you know, at times her stuff was overpowering. So, you know, those are things that you have to keep in mind. You know, our defense has got to understand. I thought we did a decent job of, you know, whether it's a Branch or it's, you know, an Addie Edwards upspin type pitcher, you know, when they're on, you know, we're going to get, especially in 2 strike counts, we're going to get those tweener balls in the middle of the field. We've got to take those outs away. We did a pretty good job of that, other than really one time. And the ball I referenced, you know, between Bree and Emery, that was second game, caught a little bit more of the barrel. But still, I think those are things that we ended up getting an out on the play. But, you know, those are just things, you know, players have got to recognize as they get comfortable with the game. You know, if you're a Briley Weber that comes in late, you know, close the second game, she's the opposite of that. You know, it's real heavy and down. So the left side of the field's got to be prepared to make plays. They're going to be top spin balls with her down spin. I thought we did a pretty good job of being, you know, prepared for that. We had, you know, I think it was Perkins made an out, you know, it's short. I think I'm right on that. I can't remember when I was switching her and EB, but, and then of course, OA made a couple plays. So, you know, we were prepared for where the ball went, and all of that comes down to pitching location as well. But yeah, you know, it's a good thing for Addie too, that, you know, she's obviously a talent. She's got, you know, a lot of room to grow, but she's really good player, and she's going to be a great player. But one of the nice things about her development, you know, is we've got a staff that can help her develop. She can help them develop, because if everybody stays healthy and we continue to move on this line, then, you know, it truly is going to be a staff. And that's something that we've had success with in the past. You know, being able to use some kids out of the pen that are different looks. And fortunately, we've got enough depth and diversity with our arms to be able to do that. So, you know, we want those guys that are going to carry a little bit of water to be fresh late in the year. And that's not just on the pitching side. You know, we rotated in 4 catchers. We could rotate in two more if we wanted to. You know, so that helps us not have to, because, you know, the big thing that's tough, you know, I've said this a couple times a day publicly. Yes, you want to get in all your kids, but you also don't want to do that, in my opinion, to the detriment of winning, because winning is also development. It was a good development moment for our team even though I think we could have done some things earlier in the game to knock that team out in the second game, it was a good win. It was a good development moment to be behind literally the entire game in game 2 and then walk it off. You've got to learn how to do that. Not every game is going to be 15-0. So I thought we did a good job of doing that. We would not have been in that position if not for some really good pinch hit at bats. And first and foremostly with our pitching staff on the back end of that. I thought, particularly Aaron Harrelson and Briley Weber, but really all the kids. I mean, Hallie Haynes, we didn't defend great behind her. I thought she had a pretty good outing coming in relief of Branch. Branch gave up the 1 home run early in the game. We didn't throw a good pitch on 1-2 and it got out of the yard. But other than that, I thought, that was a pretty good showing for all of them. And same with Warnock and Edwards in the first game. I thought they clearly did enough for us to win. I mean, anytime you don't give up any runs, you're probably going to win. So, good stuff from that part of our team for sure.
Well, I when I was at the game, Addie ran into a little bit of trouble in the 5th. She gave up the 2 hits. And I was wondering, well, how long are they going to stay with her? It's early in the season, and a lot of teams, they'll, pace a pitcher early in the year. But y'all left her in, and actually the tying run came to the plate, 2 on, 2 out. But she was able to coax a fly ball to the outfield to end that threat. And then, of course, y'all stayed with her into the 6th. And I just thought to myself, she's gone a long way here. I'm thinking if you give up a hit, I think you need to go get her. And that's exactly what y'all did. And I thought that was a great move. She gave up the single to lead off the 6th inning, and then you was able to bring in Warnock. And of course, Warnock, she kind of I think she was maybe a little nervy early, and that seemed like her location wasn't real good. But in the 7th inning, she just slammed the door, got them 1, 2, 3. And I thought that was a great moment in letting Addie get out of that tying run at the plate situation, because she's going to have to do that in the future. And then extended her time a little bit more. But I think she understood it was probably time. And I think y'all made the move at the right time to bring Warnock in.
Well, Addie's, of anybody we have, she wants the ball all the time. And I guarantee you, I haven't had an extensive conversation with her, but I know Addie very well. And, she didn't want to come out of that game. And that's a good thing. But the nice thing is that, we got other kids that can hold on to the rope in a moment like that. And that was kind of our thought process is, in a general sense, I usually have a rule. I don't like taking starters out when there's a shutout at play. And that was my thought process when the tying run came up. I thought, I've seen that happen many times now. In our case, we'll see how the season goes. If the bullpen continues to show what they've shown, maybe we can hand that off, and feel a little bit more comfortable. But in a general sense, I don't mess with that rule at all. And it paid dividends. Warnock is there's an extremely amount of, she's got, there's some kids that spin the ball really well. Her ball runs almost like a 2-seamer, in baseball. It's real difficult to harness sometimes, but when it's in there, it creates a big havoc to hitters. It's not, her speed isn't, overpowering, but the biggest thing I saw out of her that was different from a year ago is the changeup has really become a dominant pitch. She threw that, she doubled it up a couple times. It's a real we had a saying when I was with the Marlins, lefties get away with everything. And, they do. And, she's got that advantage, as does Haynes on our staff. But the changeup was a plus pitch for her the other day. That was good to see. Kaylee's a very unselfish kid. She's an extremely hard worker. I mean, this is a kid that, yesterday she was up at the facility giving lessons to, young kids. She drives every day from Trenton. Her mom and dad, are foster family. So she lives in that house. She comes from an unselfish background, and I think that shows. She's come a tremendously long way in the year plus that we've had her. Just extremely proud of her. She's going to make somebody really happy next year at the 4-year level. So we're real pleased with her, but she's a very high character kid. And I thought, that showed in that moment for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, it was good in that game. You stole a run, and you had talked about the style you played. You did a little running, and it actually, led to a run. But it was good to have Marty McCluskey put down that 2-run homer that kind of sort of iced the ball game. That's the kind of thing you like to see when a team's kind of hanging around, and she just kind of nailed the door.
She did. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to see she's a big time talent. I mean, she's still learning. Austin McNeese, that's over there with her, same thing. They're really talented players. They're still learning. But that was a good moment for her. Both those kids were responsible for several runs in the first game. Austin, the kid went down and in on her early. That was a big double that got us on the board. That's something Austin hasn't always done well in her career. I thought she really, mechanically was in a good position, stayed postured, and, turned behind the ball, and we got a big hit out of that. Marty did that twice, throughout the course of the day, the big home run. Those are two really, really, really talented kids that are they have bright futures ahead of them. Again, same type of deal. Austin lives right down the street from me in Scottsboro, so I've gotten to know her really well since I've been here. She's a pepper box, man. She doesn't like to lose. She's a hard worker. Her dad played college baseball, so she has an understanding kind of in a different way than a lot of kids do, having that influence. I think that's helped her. It's going to continue to help her. And Marty I've known Marty since she was a baby. Her family are concrete contractors out of Tuscaloosa. And my dad's been a general contractor for 50 years down there. And I remember when my dad contacted me, he said, she's still not signed. And I was like, well, we're looking at this, looking at that on catching and middle. And he said, that there's not one family of, since we've been doing this down here in the construction business, that works like that family, that has the values like that family. And he basically hung the phone up, when I was done, like, you're an idiot if you don't sign her. And he was, well, as in many times, we all have those moments with our dads that, you're like, yeah, I probably ought to listen to this. And so I'll give him credit for as long as Marty's with us that, he kind of pushed that sign. And not that, we didn't recognize that, but he certainly, made a strong point. But yeah, she's got a chance to be a really good player. Her dad played college baseball too. He was a guy that was a few years older than me growing up in Tuscaloosa, and kind of a guy that, I wanted to be like, seeing some of the opportunities he got through American Legion Baseball. And, he eventually went to West Alabama. Really good player. And, that I think that mindset helps her, just having parents that have done it. Addie Edwards is another one. Her mom played at Texas A&M, her aunt at UTC. Her aunt played at UTC. Her grandfather played with the Dolphins. So, that's a little different. Not that you can't attain that without having that lineage, but it certainly helps, and I've said this since I scouted. I believe in bloodlines. It has a tendency to prove out, so, those things have been, good things for our team for sure.
Yeah, because that's kind of like the way you look at a coach's son or a coach's daughter. I mean, that's just they know how to play the game, and they know what it's all about. Well, one concern, I guess of course, I heard Jimmy even say something coming out of the dugout. I think it was the bottom of the third, y'all loaded the bases with nobody out, and all three players popped out.
Mm-hmm.
And, coaches, I know sometimes that gets under their craw. And I heard Jimmy say something. He walked out of the dugout and mentioned something about 3 pop outs after you had the bases loaded. That's the kind of situations you get an opportunity to really to blow a game open, and you just you can't get that key hit.
Yeah, that's something we worked on that some today. We've got to continue to work on it. It's not something that's uncommon, at the early stages of the year. What is becoming more common, unfortunately, is the kids that come into your programs, no matter what college you're at, have a limited understanding of situational softball. And so, for me, one of the things that we harp on with our kids is, if it's less than 2 outs and runners in scoring position, at a very minimal, all you really want to do is make an outfielder turn around and catch the ball. If they can do that, we're going to get 60 feet. And in that particular case, we're going to get a run. So it's just understanding that we've got to do a better job in that moment. One of the things we didn't do a very good job of at times, and, we talked about this today in practice again, worked on it, is, our approach with runners in scoring position. If you see something that's moving away from your eyes out over the white, we've got to get on that right away. The pitcher is not there, especially in that scenario with it being loaded, to walk you. So, those moments can be perilous. If you don't have, say, a pitching performance like we did the other day. We were fortunate to get away with it. Typically, you'll get away with that once, a basically loaded scenario. You do it again, you're really playing with fire in a game. And I don't care how good your pitching is. So we were fortunate to get out of that, but we've got to develop a mindset of productive outs versus non-productive outs. We had 3 productive outs the same way in the scenario you mentioned that you just can't do. If I am the on-deck hitter or the in the hole hitter during that point and somebody pops up, my thought process has got to be, I'm making it out a different way. I'm going to go low and hard to make an out, whatever the game is telling me to do. And that's the game in that particular case is screaming at you to do that. So that's something we've got to be more aware of. It can be tough at times in the fall with as many people moving in and out of a lineup to get a lineup of 9 that understands and respects what's happening above them and below them within the lineup. Because, ultimately what it is you've got 9 folks that are trying to work together to score runs. This is something that's missed today. It's all about, my launch angle and my mechanics and X, Y, Z. And that's great in the cage. But on the field, you've got to be able to have an approach and a mindset that is what the game is telling you to do. Where we were most, egregiously bad was with 2 outs. I mentioned that already. Just way too many outs in the air, weak contact outs in the air with 2 outs, left a lot of runners in that scenario. Morgan Perkins, is the example, the opposite of that. We get our first run, we get a runner at 2 with 2 outs. I think it was 2 strikes even, and Morgan punches one. The kid makes a nice play to keep it in the infield. We scored. I think we beat it by about a step at home. But that's the right out happening. She ended up being safe, but that's what we want to do to make them catch, throw, catch with 2 outs. Somebody's running on contact. If it's 2 outs and 2 strikes, somebody's running on the swing. So, we've got to understand how that works into what we're doing as a hitter to score runs. So those are things we're going to definitely be working on every day, throughout the year. And, we've got another free lesson tomorrow for sure.
Well, Coach, of course, you're fixing to hit the road and hit the schedule. And this is something I meant to ask before because it's kind of interesting to me. When you go to, and of course, tomorrow will be kind of the same as what you saw Friday, both teams putting their best out there. But when you go to places like Mississippi State and they're a 4-year school, how do they do their lineups? Do they play a lot of their younger players? Do they mix varsity or, their upperclassmen in with the younger players? How do they kind of do that when you go to them?
They're doing, similar, I've been on both sides of that, in the SEC with A&M. They're doing it from a general sense. It's similar. We would play the McLennans of the world when I was at Texas A&M. It was a really good junior college out of Waco. At UAB, we played Wallace. We'd play some good teams. And we did a similar deal where, we'd put out who we felt like should start, based on what we're seeing in practice. And then, we're mixing in kind of some looks from there. So it's kind of a combination of all that. I'm sure they're going to try and hit us with their best shot and see where the game goes. I've had games with them in the past. In 2008, we went over there. We were a first-year program at Marion. They were a team that had Chelsea Bramlett, and, they were loaded. It was a top 15 team the year before. And I don't know if you remember Chelsea. She's actually coaching over at Northwest Mississippi Community College. She's one of the fastest people I've ever seen on a softball field, and she caught. So, we ended up losing that game in extra innings 2-1, but they didn't let up on us. We had a kid that threw really well that day. We made some really good plays. We kind of played over our head, but they're going to try. Again, the winning piece is development, but you're also, you don't want to get too caught up in that where you're losing looks for kids. We kind of looked at the Marion series as, similar to what we do, and it isn't exactly like that on the calendar. Typically, we'll play Thursday and Saturday, during the season and conference. This one's a Friday, Tuesday thing, so somewhat of a similar calendar timeline, a little bit more rest. But, we're looking at all the looks we can get in for 4 games, not just 2. So, there were some kids that didn't throw that we'd like to throw. It'd been nice to throw them all 8 in the first game, but we've got, another 3 or so that can throw they haven't seen. We're definitely going to take advantage of that. We have some looks defensively we want to go to, and I'm sure Mississippi State wants to do that too. I mean, they had a couple of, pretty tough junior college games with Northwest, Mississippi, and then Wallace the other day. And, just looking at that knee jerk, I'm like, it's probably similar to what happened to us. It's a pretty good offensive team. They didn't have really high numbers. They pitched and defended really well, but they're going to be better as they play more games. So, I welcome that. It'll give our team a chance to be in some positions that are going to be adverse. And, we're certainly not looking past what we're doing tomorrow, but, it'll be, we've got a really good Etowamba team on the front end of that day on Friday. And then obviously Mississippi State after that. So, all that'll be a good experience for them, good experience for us. So, we're looking forward to that opportunity for sure. It's a big one for our kids.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn you over and let Howie ask you a couple questions, but I want to ask you about this. And I'm kind of interested in this. You and Courtney, they are married. Naturally, she's an assistant coach. How do y'all make things work off the field? I know it's all business on the field, but when you're at home, you've got Rustin. Of course, you've got a son that plays at Franklin County, plays basketball. How do y'all make things work off the field?
It's challenging. You have it's not a normal lifestyle for me. The marriage, works in part because we're so vested in the same things, in terms of professional goals. But this is the profession, especially with the op tempo that it has now, where you've really got to, like yesterday afternoon is a good example. This weekend we had a Tennessee Mojo organization that was working out on our field for the whole weekend. You had players from Ohio, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, all there. And, I've got to dedicate my day, I think I was there from 7:30 to 5:30 on Saturday. And then on Sunday, I was there from about 8:30 to 1. That was a day where we had set aside, Rustin got with some of her buddies and they went to the Chattanooga Aquarium. That was fun. That was kind of the mommy day. And then, she had her in the morning yesterday. And then, it's time for us to go to dinner and have a little daddy time. We're actually doing a little bit of that today too, because she's got lessons. So it's kind of a constant trade-off. But it can be challenging. I think for us, what makes it work is, you hear a lot of people in our profession have, relationships that don't work because one of the spouses doesn't really understand the business. In our case, I played Division I SEC baseball. She played at Northwestern. So we understand that. We've obviously coached it. That's how we got connected, was through coaching. So it's challenging, but I do think that it helps us, to have similar backgrounds and understand the business. But you do have to make time for one another. For your calendar is filled up. This summer we had a really, really busy calendar. At the end of the summer, and we were able to do this, we're like, look, we have got to just shut it off. Let's go to Chattanooga. Let's go, let's do a couple of little day trips, go overnight. We were able to do that a few times, which I think really helped recharge the batteries. We don't always have that work out the way it did, but, those are good for the marriage and the family and things that are more, they're more important than softball. And, you have to, Courtney she's got a brother that's in Ecuador. That's where he lives. He's a really unique guy. He composes ballets and dancer. He's a professional dancer. He's also a professional, I don't even know the word. It's like a trapeze artist, ballerina. I mean, it's amazing what the guy can do. But he and his wife run a theater company, dance company, through a university down in Ecuador. So obviously she doesn't get to see him as much as, say, if he were down the street. He came in during, Labor Day weekend. That's not usually ideal for us, but she and Rustin jumped on a plane and went. And, that's just what you have to do. She lives in, her family's from Tucson, so they went there. And then I hold down the fort from there. Sometimes we all get to go to Colorado. We've got a lot of friends in that area. And that's, it's a big summer tournament, usually around the 4th of July that, we will recruit. So sometimes, just like a lot of people do in this business, you have to tack on vacations, in addition to the travel tournaments you're covering or the tournaments you're at. So it's unique, but I think we both enjoy it. And, we won't do this forever. But it's, you just kind of have to manage your challenges as you do it. And, fortunately, you mentioned my son, he's close enough to where I can get to him, when I need to. So it's not perfect, but it works out pretty well for us.
Yeah, well, I guess you're both very independent, but you have to have your own downtime, and I guess y'all cherish every moment you can get together.
Yeah, we do. It's you really have to be aware of. She's very good at she knows how I tick. If it were up to me, I would probably do this 24/7. I can get really tunnel visioned in it. She's one of the people that I will listen to, as is Jimmy, when I am getting that way, because that is kind of my natural comfort zone. It's not a good place to be in sometimes when it is affecting others in terms of inattention and, just kind of aloof attitude. That is, if I were going to criticize myself, sometimes I get that way when I'm really, really knee deep in driving where we need to go. But, it's not like those two people aren't, extremely dedicated to what they're doing too, but I think they do a better job of managing that naturally than I do. So, that's part of why I wanted it on the staff. You need people that are going to tell you when you are not probably operating at your best. And so I clearly have that with Courtney. Jimmy is also very capable of that. And, their strengths are not mine, which also helps tremendously. And I would say that's true on the other end, so it's a good fit. I never go to work, and I have in the past, where I'm like, man, I got to deal with this person today. I mean, we've all had jobs like that. That is not the case here. And that, you're going to have bad days in this profession. You're going to have days that, are not, you just don't want to deal with it. Losing sucks. Bad practices suck. There's a lot of loss in this, but, bad games, all that kind of stuff, missing, just, I could go, the list is endless. But at the end of the day, you're trying to create a, kind of an atmosphere and a culture where you can sustain that and keep moving forward. And so you need good people around you to do this. There's nobody that, there's a lot of people who give me credit for the kind of team we brought in. I did some of that, ultimately as the head coach, it's going to, you'll get all the credit and the blame, but Jimmy had a big role in that. Courtney had a big role in that. Our academic people, our administration had a big role in that. So, it's a team deal. You want to surround yourself with the best team you can. And, fortunately, it just happens to be for me that it's my wife. There are people that probably couldn't do that. But in our case, it works out pretty well.
Well, Coach, one more comment I wanted to make, and I'm sure this is an assessment too that Jimmy and Courtney can talk to you about it. And it's also, that can also spill over to your players. Sometimes you have to kind of sort of loosen the rope a little bit and kind of let them be themselves.
You do. That's something that I'm not, that's not, I'm kind of a, I'm sort of a taskmaster when it comes to what we do. Jimmy is really good at kind of balancing that. He'll get, serious when he needs to, but, your hitting guy needs to be a little bit more of the guy they're going to come to. He's almost like a part psychologist because, hitting is one of the hardest things you do in sports, if not the hardest. So you don't need somebody there that's beating you over the head all the time. The defense and base running guy, which is me, is going to be a little more stern because we have to do that well every day. you don't really get to recover from bad defense or bad base running. Pitching is going to be, it's kind of similar to hitting. You're going to have good days. You're going to have days that aren't very good. And, if our defense and base running is constant, then it allows those other two to, be a little bit looser. And Courtney's kind of a mix, the pitchers. There's some that she has to drive a little harder. There's some she needs to kind of let go of the ropes. So she's very smart. She does a good job of that. She's had a long track record of developing pitchers at multiple places and multiple levels. I think it's a good balance from that standpoint. But that's something I learned a long time ago. You do not need people that do what you do, and you don't need people that are just going to, do whatever you say and never check you. Those things are not going to be a factor for success down the road. So we're pretty fortunate that Dr. Campbell allowed us to, make all this work and get the right people in here to build this program where we feel good about it every day, for sure.
Yeah, I got to speak with Dr. Campbell at the softball game just a few minutes, and he said, I can tell you one thing. He goes, those three really know about softball. So he very much thinks highly of y'all. Well,
we appreciate it. I texted him after the game, and I probably don't do this enough, but we're extremely grateful. Like I said, I hope Dr. Campbell lives to be 100 and do his thing here, because he's certainly, the people in our area know that a lot better than I do. They've known him. I don't know how many years he's been here. When you count his time as an instructor, and then working his way up through administration to obviously being the boss. He's been the boss for a quarter of a century here. But, there are days that I will drive out of our facility and look around, and, you look at the workforce development building that he is responsible for getting here, under his watch, the athletic facilities, our math, science, engineering, tech building is amazing. That happened under his watch, the medical buildings. He's just done, everybody talks about leaving a legacy in your life. What a legacy he's left, for the Jackson, DeKalb area and greater, through Northeast, but, pretty exceptional what he's done. I grew up in a culture in my house where you respect people that especially are older than you, and you respect people that have put in the time to do things at a high level. One of the things that I recognized with Dr. Campbell very early on, in the first couple of meetings, is he genuinely does not want to do things if they're not at the best. And he demands that out of everybody around you. And that's a congruent situation for me, because that's what we do at our level. So very, very fortunate. There are a lot of people who don't like the administrators they work for in this business. We are not those people. We're very, very fortunate to have him, for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Campbell's one of those people. You don't have to put his name on the building. He's done made a legacy for himself. He's going to be remembered for a long, long time.
He is. It'll, and like I said, I hope that's a long time away. But what a lifetime achievement he has had, at Northeast and beyond, for sure.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Howie.
Coach, I want to try to get you thrown under the bus a little bit with Courtney real quick. Phil talked about y'all working together and everything. So is there ever a time that you may do something wrong at home, and then you get to the stadium there, then she does something wrong, you just kind of let her have it back just to kind of pick at her, aggravate her a little bit?
I would say, it's hard to live with me more than her. She's pretty easy to deal with. I'm free. I'm not very good at times of shutting it off. I try, but I think that's something I need to get better at. She's real good at, kind of understanding how I am. And we all have a responsibility to get better at things that we're not good at. But she's pretty easy to deal with. So there are times, this is one of the things that makes her special as a coach. The double that Hallie Haynes gave up, I think in the third inning the other day, right before it happened, we realized it was a bad pitch call. We should have called timeout. That's really on both of us, probably on me more so than anybody else. We let go of a pitch that wasn't where it's supposed to be. The double happens. And, she was just all over herself about it. And that's not something, you learn little things as you've done this a while of when to say something, when not to, how to say it. That was a moment that I was just going to let her kind of do her thing and be mad about it because but it's just like anybody else, if somebody steps up to the plate and says, I made a mistake, there's really nothing else you need to say. They obviously get what's going on. So, she's extremely accountable. She has really good values. I think it shows through our pictures. She has a good balance of, being stern when she has to about those things, but she's also a very good teacher. As is Jimmy. One of the things that we always want on staff is, the ability to teach and recruit. So, I think that part, comes out in spades. But yeah, you just like with her. I mean, there's times, and it's not just because you're married. With any staff member, you kind of have to pick and choose when you're, when you say the little things or when you react to something, because, it's a heated business, and I have seen that go the other way, many times. So, fortunately we've got a group with, a lot of experience and trust for sure. So that makes it easier.
I know Jimmy was on here the other day, and he wanted to make sure, and he emphasized very heavily that you was older than he was. Um, so
Yeah. 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 I've got about a year on Jimmy. It probably doesn't look like it, but it probably looks like more than that. But yeah, we're pretty similar in age. He's about he's about a year, I think, right at it, younger than I am. But yeah, we've known each other now for about 20. So, a lot of years, a lot of years. And he's one of the best in our business. He's one of the best recruiters. He's one of the best evaluators. He's one of the best catching guys, and he's an exceptional hitting guy. We're extremely fortunate. It's a huge compliment to me when Jimmy, made a statement the other day. I heard, and I can't remember what it might have even been y'all's interview. I can't remember, but he said, he would not be coaching if it weren't for this staff. He's kind of transitioned into the AD role, and that's where his passion is, and he does an exceptional job of that. Our sports teams are coming right along. We've made some really good hires. And I think bright days are ahead for many programs. And, Jimmy is a servant leader. And, I think the entire community will be real pleased with his performance as an AD, because obviously that's his main job. And he does a really good job at it. And, I had worked for him before, in the capacity of assistant coach. I've worked alongside him as an assistant coach. So, we've always viewed it as, we're kind of working together. It doesn't really matter the role. We have similar, we go about it differently, but very similar values and what we see as important. Cut our teeth under some of the same mentors. So, there's not a ton of guys out there left that, kind of come from the old school world of baseball. And fortunately, he's one of them. And we believe pretty deeply in that. So, those are things that, make, working with one another, pretty easy for sure.
two more things, and we're going to let you get out of here. We appreciate your time. This is, for everybody that's new to this is going to be a bi-weekly show, and we appreciate your time letting us do this and be a part of it. But let's talk about going to Marion tomorrow. Give us a little rundown of what will take place as far as starting tomorrow morning with you and the team until you get to Marion.
So we'll leave at about 8:00. We've got a 1 p.m. doubleheader start. I think we've got a stop in there, for eating. I was down there for 6 years. It's a different place. I have a lot of respect for, Dr. Michelle Abbey is their AD down there. I worked for her for 6 years. She's an exceptional person, very good at her job. One of the best ADs I've ever worked for anywhere at any level. She's kind of one of the best kept secrets in our state. A lot of people don't know this. She was back when she coached, when Marion had a high school, those of us that are our age and older, remember when it was a private high school, pre 2004. And she actually coached the men's team to a state title a couple times, as a basketball coach. And that, to my knowledge, that's the first time a woman's ever done that. And, I can tell you, having worked for her for 6 years, I can see why. Just a really good leader. Her husband down there is also he's the admissions director. There's a lot of things that would not go as well as they do at Marion without the Ivies. They're really good people. So I'll look forward to seeing them tomorrow. I mentioned Jeff Benson. He does a great job. It'll be good to go down there. It's a different atmosphere. The kids down there have to wear the uniform. They are on a West Point type, schedule daily. So everything's kind of mapped out. If you're coaching there, you typically get them from 3 to 5:30. So, they'll be loving the fact that they've got a little more time, not in a military environment tomorrow. And that's one of the things that makes it a tough place to play. When if we get up on it and they play taps for the end of the day, everything stops, at Marion. You stop, you salute the flag, you pause while they lower the flag. That's a big, for me being an ex-military guy, it's good to see, the kids that come out of there. We had a lot of kids that came out of there that were from various backgrounds that have done very well in life. And I think in part of that, is because of that school. So I will always speak highly of that school. Michelle gave me my first college job. So, they're a credit. Michelle also serves as our region director for women's athletics in the state of Alabama for the Alabama Community College Conference. And I couldn't think of a better person to do that. So, very, very excited to go down there and see them. It'll be, it's a different atmosphere. And those kids, as Colonel Benson used to say, he was the president when I was down there. It's Spartan living, down there. Marion is we live in a small community where we are, but it's extremely rural and, at times even kind of considered desolate, down there. It's different. You've got the town square down there at Marion. It's one of the oldest towns in Alabama. So it'd be a good experience for our kids to see that. There's a lot of history on Marion and Selma, and I've seen PhDs when I was in history class in Alabama, comment on it, and then you ask them, have you ever been to Selma, and they haven't, and so a lot, it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit. So it's good to get down there. I think it'll be good for our kids. If I had time, we took our UAB team down to Marion and Selma when I was there to show them some of the historic sites. Really enjoyed that. I used to do that when I taught history down there. So, it's a unique place. I think it's good for our kids being in the state of Alabama to take a trip down there, see that, it's kind of the citadel of Alabama. So it'll be an experience that they'll remember because it is so different there. So we're excited about that and, ready to go down there and get after it tomorrow for sure.
So you'll get loaded up. Chris will have the bus fired up and ready to go. Y'all leave at 8 on the dot, get down there around 1 o'clock. What will be pregame going on as far as warming up and all that?
Yeah, we'll probably get down there around 11:15.
Okay.
And we go in, we'll have it's about a 3-hour ride with a little change. And, we'll have our pregame hitting, we'll have a pregame defense, stretch throw, and then get ready to roll. And obviously our bullpen time for the pitchers and catchers. But yeah, it'll be your typical type road environment. And, like I said, just the atmosphere of the place is a little different. I'm sure they'll let out the students for the game. I don't know if they have a baseball game going on too. The field sits up on top of the hill, and then the baseball field is below it, beneath that hill. A lot of times they'll have games going on at the same time. I don't know, to my knowledge, I don't know if they do, tomorrow, but typically, when I was there, anytime we had a sporting event in the middle of the day, a lot of times they let the students out. Again, they're regimented on when they can leave, when they can do things that are extracurricular. So, they'll come out there, and at times that can be, I told our kids, you may get called some things tomorrow. You may have a little rowdy atmosphere, which is good because on Friday they definitely will at Mississippi State. I can tell you that from being in the SEC. So, those are good things, just to be able to handle a hostile environment. I have no reason to believe they'd be anything but respectful, but It's a good environment for us to be in early on, especially knowing where we're going after this. This schedule is kind of graduated. I'm not taking anything away from Marion. I think they'd be the first to tell you, they're Mississippi State is another animal, so we're not looking past that at all in any way, but it's a good early road test for us, and it'll be hard. They definitely proved the other day if we don't play well, we're not going to win. So that's less of we want to win every time we get on the field, but in the fall we really just want to improve from where we were the day before. That's kind of the driving factor and some of the schedule that's going on when we go down there for sure.
So when you get back and you start the practices Wednesday, Thursday, all that stuff, will you bring the cowbells out to get the girls used to it?
No. The biggest thing we're going to be doing is turning up the speed of the game a lot. We've done some of that already, but we definitely have got to do that because, after Mississippi State, it doesn't get any easier. We take a road trip to Troy, and then immediately thereafter, we're on the road overnight, with a very good McNeese team that is about as well coached as any team you'll see in the country with James Landreneau and that bunch. I always want to play him. They'll throw everything at us that you can possibly see from a short game and base running standpoint. He does a really good job. And then, the next day we're going to turn around and we're going to play Josh Taylor at Louisiana Tech, who's an exceptional coach. He and I had some wars when he was in the league with me, when he was at La Tech and I was at UAB. And then we played him again, when I was at A&M and he was at La Tech. They came and played us, and it's never been easy. He does a great job. Those guys are really good coaches. And obviously Sam does a really good job at Mississippi State too. So, it'll be, all of those experiences, Eric Newell's bunts will run you off the field at Troy if you're not ready. So those are all, experiences that we need to welcome and learn from, because there's going to be some adverse moments. And, I know our kids are excited about it because, we're fortunate that we have some opportunities to put our kids in front of these type of programs. Not every school can do that. And, we're real fortunate, and we're going to take advantage of the opportunities. And, hopefully it turns into something for our kids as well. In whether it's a scholarship or a coach sees you can pass your name off to somebody else, all those are good things for us. So, we're pretty excited about all that.
Well, when you get back home after this, well, pretty much all your games, I was looking at the schedule, I'll go, pretty much all the games are on the road. But when you get back in, I would like to come up to the practice facility one day and just stand in the batter's box and not try to hit by no means, but just see some of those pitches coming in there, some of the rise balls, the drop balls, and all that, just to see what the batter's eye really has to see.
Yeah, it's a quick game. If it's a 60-mile-an-hour pitch, 43 feet, you got about 0.42 seconds to react, which is the equivalent of about a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And then obviously some of our kids throw harder than that. So it's a quick reacting game. That makes it fun. That means, things can change, very, very fast. So, all those are good things about our games. We'd love to have you do that. It's a great facility. Like I mentioned, we had some kids as far away as Ohio this weekend, come see it. They were all blown away. And those are kids that are used to touring, Division I facilities. So, anytime we can do that, is a good thing. And, we had them as close as Ardmore and as far away as, Ohio, which was cool. But yeah, I appreciate you guys having us on the show. And I was going to plug before I got out of here, we talked about that off the air, Greg Bell, we love what he does at WWIC. I appreciate you guys, letting me come on and Greg come on. It's a busy Monday for me, but it's also good to, be able to kind of keep our fans and our recruits and everybody up to date on, everything that's going on with Northeast Alabama Community College softball. And we greatly appreciate the access and the ability to get that out, to greater Chattanooga and our 2-county area and beyond that. So we appreciate it greatly. And thank you guys for doing that for sure.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate you. You done said I could come up there, so watch out. I'm going to be there one day, and so I just want to see the batter's perspective of the ball come flying in there.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
we welcome it. Yeah, come on and see us for sure.
and the last thing I want to ask is, let's see if we can work it out where on our next show, which would be 2 weeks from today, possibly getting a player or two to come on and join us as well, talk to us a little bit.
Yeah, we could do that. The easiest way to probably get that done is to, do it at our facility. I've usually got Rustin on Mondays, and Rustin can easily keep herself busy at our facility. She kind of considers that her second home anyway. Um, and we'll be able to get some, our kids are in and out of that facility all the time. It would be real easy to do it in our, kind of what's become our de facto interview room there in the front lobby, and go from there for sure. We'd love to do that.
Yeah, just grab a couple of them, just hop in there, and we'll see what we need to do to try to make it work out where we can do that. Love to have the players on there and get their perspective of the game, and maybe get a few Coach Joe Guthrie stories from the girls' side of it.
Yeah, it sounds good.
So, and Coach, we're going to let you get out of here. As always, shout outs before we get going.
Well, biggest thing I'd like to say is, we had one of our largest attended camps last Wednesday. We're doing one more on this Wednesday. Obviously the Wednesday after that, we're going to be on the road at Troy. So we're kind of taking a break, after that, just because of the demanding schedule we've had with our players and our game. But we had a really well attended one. We expect this one to be well attended as well. We'll do that, one final time this fall at our place Wednesday night from 6 to 8. The information is up on my Facebook and Twitter, X accounts now. We'd love to do that. And then the other piece is just to our fans, what a great turnout we had from the community. The stands were full. It was really good support. Definitely felt like a home game. And I know our players were fired up about that. And, as we move in, we've got one more, date down the road, November 6th. We're going to play a pretty talented travel ball team from Arizona, the Storm, that are going to come in. And, we'd love to see that, continue in terms of support and go from there and let that carry on into the spring season for sure.
Do you have a number as far as either one of you, since both of you, well, of course, Joe, Coach, you was there, but Phil, you was there. Do y'all have a rough estimate as far as how many people was there to watch Friday?
I really couldn't take the entire soccer team was there, which was good. I thought that was great to have them there. It's probably, I'd say, maybe half full, but the crowd was vocal. I mean, they were very vocal, and that's what I was was surprised at, is how vocal everybody. They weren't there just to watch the ball game. They were very vocal, very involved.
Yeah. You would know that better than me. It definitely looked up like we had support. I tend not to look up there a whole lot, but that last picture on the walk-off, was kind of a good snapshot for all of it. The crowd was, I watched that play probably 15 times on film, after we got done, and the crowd really was electric. They were electric when Fran came up to the plate, before she hit the home run to win. So, all that is, we had a really good record at home last year for a first-year program, and, I think that helps us. And, this will be a good opportunity to, carry that over onto the road for sure.
That's great. Coach, great to have you on. Like I say, it's going to be a bi-weekly show, so join us 2 weeks from tonight when Coach will be back on with us and talking about his trip down to Marion and Mississippi and trips everywhere, basically. Let's just put it like that.
We'll have covered some ground by the time I see you guys again, for sure. From Mississippi to Louisiana and everything in between, for sure.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us, and we're going to work on getting some players to join us here the next time, and it's going to be great. And we appreciate your time and excuse me, letting us be a part of your journey this season, Coach.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for Lee Howard Cheney, Phil Harris, and our guest tonight, Northeast Alabama Community College head softball coach, Coach Joe Guthrie. Best of luck tomorrow and safe travels, Coach.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. You guys take care.
Yes, sir. Good night, everybody.